In this video, we're going to use Vuex within our Laravel and Vue application to log in a user and store some information about that user. We've already done some pre-configuration and setup, so if you haven't seen how I set up this project, I'll put a link in the description below or somewhere up top here to get you up to speed. If you've already completed those steps to set up your project, then you should be in good shape. Let's go ahead and turn the login form into a component and include it as part of our single page application. So since Bootstrap is already included by default, I'm going to snag a login form over here. I'm just on getbootstrap.com. I'll go to documentation and then components and forms. And right here, just a quick and easy login form. I'm going to copy this right here. And this code represents this form. I'm just snagging the source code. And then I'll go back into Visual Studio Code, and not in our store, but in our components, resources, JS components, I'm going to create a new component. I'm going to say new file, and we'll call this login form.view. Now, first we want to put our template in here, and I'm going to just paste that Bootstrap form right in here. And we also want to include our script tags. So let's just clean this up a little bit. And one more. There we go. I'm going to get rid of this checkbox in here. And that looks pretty good. I'm also going to lose this right here. I don't need that. So this should just be a simple login form. It doesn't do anything yet, but go ahead and save that. Now we just created a new component, but we're not watching our project right now. I haven't run any npm commands. We could run npm run dev, and that would recompile our project, but I typically like to use npm run watch so that it constantly watches my project as I make updates. So I'm going to do npm run watch in my root project folder. Okay, now we're watching our project folder, and as I make changes and updates to any components in our resources file, it's going to automatically update. Let's go ahead and add the login component to the login blade. This is the login blade right now, but we're going to change that. We'll come over here to Views, Auth, Login Blade, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy out this form right here. We're going to get rid of the form that's in there. We want to include the form that we just created. Now, in order to use the form we just created, I'm going to do ID of app, and then I should just be able to put login-form, and then close that off with login-form. Now, we're including the login form component right here, but before this is going to work, if I refresh this page over here, it's not going to show anything. The reason for that is we haven't added it to our app.js file. So let's go ahead and up here in our app.js file, I'm going to copy this right here, and we called it login-form, and the actual file is in the components, and we called it login, capital F-O-R-M. Command S to save. Our application should have refreshed, and there we go. We have our new Vue component login form. It doesn't do anything yet, but it's part of our application now. All right, so let's go ahead and make sure that our Vuex store is working real quick. Eventually, we're going to link up this login controller to our API and allow the user to log in and store a token. So let's jump down here. I'm opening up Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go back into my current user module, and right here inside of state, we're just going to manually put this in here for right now just to see how it's all connected. So inside of state, I'm going to create an object, and we're going to call it user. And in that object, we'll say it has something called an email, and we'll just type scriptster@scriptster.com for the email. Command S to save. Now the idea is we want to be able to view the state inside our login form. just to confirm that it's working. We're not going to leave it like this. This is just a proof of concept. So down here in export default, we're going to add some computed properties. So inside of computed, we'll just call it user. And inside of user, there will be a get method, and we're going to return this store state, and then we can say current user dot user. All right, now we want to use this computed property. So up here for the input of email, I'm just going to add a vModel equals user for this computed user property, and I want to access the email that we set inside of the state. So go ahead and Command S to save. So we're saying this vModel hit this computed property, and within that property we want to hit the email, and we're grabbing that from this store state, current user user. So we come over here to our current user and the state of user and then email. So ideally we should see scriptster at scriptster inside of our login form email address. So go ahead, Command R to refresh, and we do. So we're actually using Vuex to pre-populate an email address. Now this isn't a practical method. You wouldn't do this. You wouldn't want to pre-populate an email in here. Obviously, everybody has a different email address. I just wanted a proof of concept to make sure everything was connected and linked up right. So let's go back, and we can get rid of the email address in here. We're going to leave the user object for now. We'll end up grabbing information and populating it into here later. So I'll just leave that as is for now. Command S to save. I'm going to go back over to my login form. So for the login form, I don't actually want to store state. I actually want to do the opposite of that because this user could be anyone. So I'm going to get rid of the computed property, and I'm going to opt for just data. And let's go ahead and pop some stuff in here. Oops. All right, and inside of data, we'll have a user, and that user will have an email and a password. All right, so we can leave this as is, user.email. Since we don't have a computed property now, user.email is going to hit this data user email. We also want to add a vModel for our password. So go ahead and click right here, and I'll just pop that in, vModel, and we'll do user.password. Command S to save. Now both our input for the user email and the user password are linked to the data user email and user password. Now we're going to need a method to pass this information to our Vuex store. So we're going to use our Vuex store, and we're going to jump right in here, and we're going to use this const actions. We're going to create an action handler, and that action handler is going to handle the user login. So let's just call it login user. Okay. And login user will take an object of the user information. So we're going to pass in user. We also need to include this empty object here. We'll end up using this later on. What this allows us to do is pass in information from our state. So we could say inside of this, we could say state, and then maybe getters. Actually, you would probably say state or commit, and then you could use both of those inside of this action handler. So if there was a property inside of state, maybe there's a property up here and it was called, I don't know, color, and that color was red, and you wanted to access that color down here, you would have to pass it within an object like you see right here. And then I could say state.color. And I would be accessing this color right here of color red. But we don't need that for right now, so I'm just going to leave it out. I just wanted to explain what that was very briefly. So we'll get rid of that. We'll get rid of this. And we also don't need this up here. All right, so we have our login user, we have our empty object, and then we're going to pass in an object, a user object, which will contain the user email and the user password. So I'm going to use Axios for this. So let's do .post, and post will take a URL. I happen to know that my URL is going to be API/v1/user/login. And then that's going to pass some parameters. And the parameters we want to pass will be email and password. All right, so we're actually going to get our email from this right here. So we're going to say user.email and then user.password. So now when our user tries to log in, we're going to pass the user object containing the user email and user password parameters. We're calling one email, we're calling one password, and then we want to do something with it. Let's go ahead and do then response. We'll use an arrow function, and let's just console log the response data for right now. All right, and I'm just going to add put that on the next line for right now. All right, I'm going to Command S to save. So now we want to use this action right here, this action handler. So let's go back over to our form and let's create some methods. We got it. We'll call this method login. All right. And this login method, we want to execute our action handler from our current user. So we'll say this dot store dot dispatch. In order to execute an action, we use the word dispatch, and then we can do current user slash login user, I believe we called it. Yeah, login user. And then we also want to pass it this dot user. So it'll pass in this user object. And this user object will contain the email that was typed here and the password that was typed here. Command S to save. And as of right now, we want when the user clicks this button to execute the login method. So we'll use an @click equals login. And then I'm going to Command S to save. Okay, and there's one other thing I wanted to do. I'm just going to get rid of these form tags and switch them over to div. You could leave them as form tags, and then over here you could put a click.prevent, but I think it's just easier to change the form tags to div tags. And then I'm going to Command S to save. Now we expect when we click this button, we're going to execute the login. This stored dispatch, we're going to dispatch the current user action handler of login user, and we're passing it the information of user, email, and password. And then if we come over here to our current user, we're going to try and hit this URL with our user, email, and password, and then we're just going to console log out the response data. So let's go ahead and give that a try. I'm going to refresh. I use Option Command I to bring up the console, the Chrome developer tools, and I just want to do that so that I can click over here on my network tab Actually, I'll leave it as console since we're going to console log. And let's just try and log in. Scriptster at Scriptster, and then password. And we'll do submit. All right, and here we go. We get our user and our access token. So this is what we want. We want to save this access token. We'll probably store it in local storage. So let's go ahead and do that. When a user clicks the submit button, we can see we have a successful login. Let's go ahead and grab this information and save it and get them over into our single page application. So I'm going to come back over here to Visual Studio Code, and instead of logging out our data, this time I want to say, first we want to check the response for an access token. If it was a successful response, we should have an access token. So let's say if response.data.access token, let's go ahead and save the token. And I'm just going to save it in local storage. We'll do set item, and we'll call it, I'm going to call it blog underscore token. And then we want to save the response data access underscore token. Make it a little easier to read. Command S to save. And let's just make sure that we're setting our access token. I actually got to fix this real quick. It should say set item. So local storage dot set item. We're going to call our token blog token. You can call it whatever you want. The blog token is going to store the response data. All right, so let's go ahead and try and log in again. And this time we want to make sure that we're storing this token will get saved. So let's go hit submit. We see we console logged it out again. Now I'm going to jump over here to my application, and right here in my local storage, I have the key of blog token and my token. So I'm storing the token in local storage right now. If I wanted to access it, I could access this under the name of blog token. So good. Now I am returning the user along with the user information here. I could store that in local storage as well. I'm going to skip that for right now. Depending on your setup and what you're doing, there may be reasons that you want to store this user information in local storage. There may be reasons you don't want to store this information in local storage. It's really up to you and what your application is and what it's doing, and why that'll kind of dictate whether or not you want to store that type of information into local storage. So I'm going to leave that out for now. I'm only going to store access token. And now that I have an access token, I'm going to come back over here to VS Code or Visual Studio Code, and now that I have the access token saved, I want to redirect the user to the single page application. So I'm going to do window.location.replace, and I believe my location is /home. So I want to take them to the root URL /home. And then I'm going to Command S to save. The only other thing I want to do is turn off some middleware that is on my home controller. So I'm just going to go up here to home controller, and I'm just going to turn this off. I'm just commenting it out. That's fine. Command S to save, and I should be good to go. We're going to store an access token. We're going to redirect me up here to the /home. I should see my single page application, and I should have a access token saved in local storage. So let me go ahead and refresh this. I'm going to sign my user in. All right, and there we go. I am signed into my application, and I should have my application blog token is saved. And now I can use this blog token whenever I make any requests in my app. Okay, now that we're logged into our app, we want to make sure that we tell Axios to use that blog token every time it makes a request, whether it's a post, a get, a put, delete, whatever. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, And I'm gonna put it in the app container for right now. This might change down the road, but when we logged into our app, we actually changed, we had a page refresh. So we went to /home. That loaded our single page application. Now that we're in our single page application, we're going to stay in that single page application. Even though these URLs might change, what we'll end up having is a hashtag or a pound sign, and then whatever our URL is, it could be dashboard or whatever. But this /home is never going to change now that we're in our single page application. So now that we're in our application, we can tell it every time you use Axios, use this header, this authorization header. If we set it prior to logging into our application, it would reset and Axios wouldn't know to use it. So right down here, I'm in the app container.view file. I'm going to add a created method, and we're going to say axios.defaults.headers.common, and we're going to put an authorization header in here. Authorization. Now my API for Laravel requires the authorization header to contain the word bearer, B-E-A-R-E-R, and then a space, and then my token. So I called my token blog token. So we need to pull that from local storage. We set it a second ago. So we're going to say bearer space and then local storage dot get item this time, because we want to get the bearer or the blog token, and we'll just say blog token, and then Command S to save. So now when we load this app instance for the first time, when it's created, we're setting the Axios default authorization header for bearer space and then our blog token. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to refresh, and let's log in again. All right, now we're logged into our application. Now I want to make sure our Axios header has that bearer token. So let's do window.axios.defaults .headers.common, and then we put it in authorization, and as you can see, it's pre-populating, and it did set our authorization header. So we should be good to go. Every Axios request is going to automatically attach this token. So that should be good to go. Now that we're logged in, let's go ahead and grab our user from our API. So I don't think I have a route for that right now. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go to my user controller, and we'll just say show. I'm just going to create a new method in here for my current user. So I'll do public function current user, and I'm going to return auth user. And since I'm using the auth, I want to make sure I include it up here. I'll say use illuminate/support. Oh, I can't spell today. Support/facades/auth. And then Command S to save. Now we should be good to go. And we want to go down here and add a route so we can hit that controller. And we'll go into being our API. And we do want the middleware, so I'm going to use this one. So we can only hit this route if we're logged in. And it's going to be user/, I'll just call it current. And then we're going to hit our user controller, and we want to hit the current user. Command S to save. Okay, now that we have our route and our user controller for the current user. Let's go back over to our current user store and let's add an action in here that's just, let's just get the current user. So we'll say get user, and in order, we'll use Axios .get, and our URL will be /API/v1/user/current, and then we'll say, once we get that, we'll say then response, and let's do something with our response. This is where we can pass in commit, and we want to use commit. Commit is used to commit a mutation. We haven't made any mutations yet. First, let's create our mutation, and our mutation we'll call this set user, and that set user will take in state and data, and then we'll say state.user, and we want to set the state user to whatever data we receive. So I'm just going to say data, and then Command S to save that. And now we want to use this mutation. So we'll come back up here. When we get the user, we'll say commit, and then set user, and we want to pass it the response.data, and then Command S to save. So now whenever we use this action handler of get user, we're going to set the user. We'll jump down here, we're going to pass it the response data, and then we're going to set the state of user to whatever the data is that we received. Let's go ahead and try it out. In order to do that, we need to come back over to our app container, and after we've created our app, now we want to tell it, now that we've set our default authorization header, let's tell it to grab our user. So to do that, we'll do this store.dispatch, and we'll do current user / get user. And this time we don't have to pass any parameters in. After we've created our app container view, we've got our headers, and now we're going to try and say get our user. Command S to save. So let's go ahead and add another computed property up here, and we'll just call it current user. And we want to get, and we'll do return space this store state current user dot user. Now, if this works, we should be able to see this computed property. So let's just go ahead and include the current, something from our current user. I don't know, let's just put it in here somewhere. Right here, we'll say log out, and we'll do current user dot first, I think is a property of the current user. It would be the first name. So Command S to save, and then we'll log out. I'm going to refresh my app. We'll do Scriptster, submit, and as we see now, after our application loaded, it hit that URL, it grabbed our current user information, and my current user's first name is Scriptster. So now we're actually loading information from Vuex into our app. We can use that anywhere in our application. We can say current user.first anywhere within our app. If we were to change it on this page, it'll be reflected on every single page within our application, but we'll dive into more of that later. But as you can see, we're able to log into our application, store a token, use that token, apply it to an Axios authorization header, and now that we have that authorization header, we can use it on every Axios request, and that's what we're going to use a lot in our Vuex as we use these different action handlers to pull information from our API and set the state of our application. Now that we know it works, I'm going to go ahead and remove that scriptster from our app since we don't need it. It was just a confirmation that everything is set up and working correctly. We'll refresh. It's gone. And there we go. Our Vuex is set up. It's working. We've confirmed that it's working, and now we're going to use it throughout the rest of our project. So if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. I typically like to keep these videos short, sweet, and to the point, but there's a ton of really cool stuff to cover when it comes to Vuex and state management in an application. I think it goes without saying, but positive feedback really is motivating. So if I was able to help you learn something new, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and sign up for future notifications. Thanks again for watching.